I am the co-lead of the Child Labour Task Force of the Alliance for Child Protection and Humanitarian Action and technical specialist for the International Labour Organization. On this call today, we will have Camilla from the Alliance. We also have Sandra Magnon. We have Thomas Agustin, Giovanna Vio, and we have Davide Rossi, who will be presenting today on a number of issues around CAAFAG. Before going further, I'll just do a few pieces of housekeeping. So first up, we have translation available to all. We have English, French, Spanish, and Arabic. So if you have a look at the bottom of the Zoom options list, there should be a little globe where you can select which language you would like to follow along in. We also have a Q&A function. So please, I see already we have a number of you introducing yourself in the chat, which is perfect. Please continue to introduce yourself in the chat. But if you have questions for any of the presenters, please, if you could use the Q&A function, which is also at the bottom of the options, then that would also make everything much simpler and easier for all of us to respond to. Please feel free to write your questions in whatever language is most comfortable for yourselves. And hopefully we have the translation ability to convert it for all of us as well. Anything else? Also, finally, if you are not yet a member or have not joined, please do join the Changemaker community of practice. There is one for the Alliance for Child Protection. There is a sub one to join for the children associated with armed forces and armed groups. I've just clicked the link into the chat, so please feel free to join there. Right, okay, so without further ado then, we can move on to the opening remarks from Camilla Jones of the Alliance for Child Protection and Humanitarian Action. Start the video.
Good day to you all, and thank you for joining this webinar to launch the Alliance's new technical note on livelihood for children associated with armed forces and armed groups, or CAAFAG. I'm so pleased that this resource has been made available through the collaborative efforts of colleagues from the child protection, food security and livelihood sectors. This technical note, alongside the technical note on education for CAAFAG, which will be launched tomorrow, provide an excellent springboard for enhanced collaboration between the two sectors. Such collaboration is key for ensuring positive and sustainable outcomes for CAAFAG, children who are at such heightened risk in humanitarian crises. This initiative has benefited from the existing collaboration between the food security and child protection sectors, as showcased in the Alliance's recent 2023 annual meeting in a session called Food for Thought. It's been brought together by those who understand the potential for livelihood interventions from the child protection sector and key child protection advocates from within the food security and livelihood sectors. So why is this technical note needed? Well, as you know, CAAFAG are children who are at grave risk or who have survived major challenges far too young in life. They're often continuing to experience ongoing risks and challenges as a result of their experiences. And so a viable livelihood can be what they need to find stability in their lives. Livelihood interventions can be a critical component of long-term, sustainable and holistic reintegration programmes that respond to the specific needs and interests of boys and girls. At the same time, they remain important in prevention strategies, and they can also offer the right incentives for children who are in armed groups to voluntarily exit. So with all of these potential ways that livelihood interventions can be used to improve outcomes for CAAFAG, it's critical that we get them right. But it's hard to do this. Anybody who has experience of running a project that aims to improve the livelihood of children associated with armed forces and armed groups knows this. It's hard to ensure that interventions provide ongoing improvements to livelihoods, which is something child protection specialists rarely know how to do. It's also very difficult to sequence and target interventions for CAAFAG so that they come at the right time to prevent recruitment and aid reintegration, which is where the child protection specialists will often come in. One of the major challenges is that both sectors are highly specialised, as sectors are, and therefore prone to working in silos. Yet collaboration is what's needed to benefit the children who need it most. Clear guidance that speaks the language of both sectors is needed, and that's what this paper provides. We'd like to say some words of thanks on behalf of the Alliance. So this paper has been led, the development of this paper has been led by the CAAFAG task force of the Alliance, and we'd like to thank them for their tireless efforts in bringing it to this final stage. We'd also like to thank those organisations, individuals and sectors who contributed to the development of the technical note, whether through the reference group, as key informants or as reviewers. And colleagues will jump in later if anyone's been missed. But finally, we'd like to thank USAID's Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance for their specific support to this initiative, as well as to their wider support to child protection in humanitarian action. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Camilla, for that. And now I can hand over live to Davide Rossi, who's the Global Food Security Cluster Programme Officer, for his opening words. Davide, over to you.
Thank you, Simon. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you well.
Cool. Thanks a lot. Thanks for that. I'm very pleased to be here today to give a few words of opening to this important technical note that, as the previous intervention highlighted, was a collective effort of the task force, which I think was able to put together quite a very interesting point on the note that we're going to see afterwards all together. But I think within the challenges that are highlighted is not easy to put together two sectors that sometimes look into each other distant and sometimes are targeting in different ways the population in need. However, as food security, we are very happy because we know very much how much food insecurity become an issue of protection in the field. And also, we would like to remind that, when we talk about food security, very often we think about food assistance, we think about the access to food. This is not entirely correct in the sense that the dimension of food security is very large. And I think the way of influencing also the other actors is an opportunity. And in this case, when we look at the dimension of stability, which livelihoods is one of the force to strengthen, it is very important for us to put it together with protection and with the child protection, especially on this technical note. Many points are highlighted and a point of connection made, but also practical action and example. So this is very important. Also remembering that, in a recent, I think it was in 2018, there was a Security Council resolution that really highlight the link between food security and armed conflict as a cause and as an effect of armed conflict. So the way I think this technical note have been developed is very important because we looked at it in a phased approach and also trying to understand how the livelihoods and food security will mitigate some risk. We work on the prevention, on the release and the integration of the child that are associated with armed forces or armed group. But also, I think by the end of the technical note, you will see also some suggestion, recommendation, and practical action for the collaboration between the two sectors. So we're talking about mainstreaming, but we're talking also about joint programming and integrating programming. So again, we are very happy
mainstream, mais aussi qui soit plutôt sur la jonction des deux secteurs. Merci à ceux qui ont participé à la conception de ces notes, mais c'est quelque chose que nous allons promouvoir dans notre secteur. Nous savons
one of the, or the food security can be one of the change into that. Yeah, I think said that again, thank you for this opportunity, and I'm very looking forward to hear the technical note and the other participant to talk. Thank you. Bye bye.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Davide. I'm talking more about the technical note itself, how it's come together. We have one of the main instigators, as it were, of this note. So I will hand over and let me introduce you to Sandra Mainon, the CAAFAG advisor at Plan International and co-lead of the CAAFAG task force. Apologies for butchering your last name as always, Sandra, but please go ahead.
No worries, Simon. Thank you. All right, so share my screen. Right. So thank you and welcome to all of you for this launch of the technical note on livelihood interventions for CAAFAG. And I'm very pleased to present it today. So as you have understood, this technical note was developed by the CAAFAG task force. And this comes with another technical note focusing on education that we will launch tomorrow. So this work on cross-sectoral interventions started a couple of years ago, and then we started by asking field practitioners, organizations like international organizations, national ones, governments, what are the sectors they would like to better work with when it comes to CAAFAG programming. So we sent a survey around, and then we had about 45 people from 22 countries who responded. And the two top sectors that were selected were food security and livelihood and education. So this is now the focus of those two technical notes. So before I start, just wanted to give you a quick overview of the methodology. So I basically started with a desk review, with a literature review, looking at reports, and also I did about 25 key informal interviews with actors from both sectors from about 10 countries. I also set up a reference group for this particular technical note with actors from the food security and livelihood sector and from the child protection sector. So we were looking specifically at people who have an interest in working with CAAFAG. Some of them actually were implementing or designing programs with CAAFAG. And then we had numerous actors from the reference group, but also from other people with various expertise who also did a review of the technical notes. So this is to say that we developed this technical note with the idea of being co-owned by both sectors. So it's not just child protection sector saying, okay, this is what we need to do. It's really like both sectors that came together to say, how can we better address the needs of CAAFAG? And so this document is meant for actors from both sectors. So this technical note also is coming as a complement to another resource that the CAAFAG task force has developed and launched last year. So this is the CAAFAG Program Development Toolkit. Some of you may have heard about it. And so this toolkit is meant to provide guidance on how to design programs for CAAFAG. And we obviously talk about economic recovery and livelihood interventions. So this technical note complements the toolkit and then provides additional information specifically on livelihood, the types of programs, key considerations, things to look at, and also how to promote multi-sectoral programming, which is one of the key approaches that we promote in the toolkit. In this technical note, you will find 4 different sections. So we will first start with an introduction about what is CAAFAG. It's quite succinct because we have other resources that you can find on the webpage that develops more needs of CAAFAG, the issues with recruitment and impact of recruitment. So in this technical note, it will be quite succinct, but just to have an overview of who are CAAFAG and key challenges. In this introduction, we also talk about the differences between the 2 sectors and how this leads somehow to key challenges. The second section is a summary of key challenges, which I'm going to briefly explain. And then we have some lessons learned and good practices and some recommendations to promote collaboration between the 2 sectors. Throughout the document, you will find case studies, recommendations, lots of visuals. So hopefully this was made to be a user-friendly tool for field practitioner. So let me start with a few challenges that came out mainly from the key informant interviews as well as from the literature review. I think the first one, which is one that we all talk about for various reasons, but it's the lack of long-term funding. When it comes to economic recovery, I think it's particularly challenging. If you have 1 year or less type of funding, then it's very difficult to implement quality livelihood programs. We also have an issue of the lack of expertise of child protection actors in livelihood who implement programs for CAAFAG. And this can lead to the poor quality of programs and sometimes also to limited outcomes. But the reason why child protection actors do implement livelihood programs is also because the CAAFAG are rarely accepted in livelihood programs from the food security actors. And so we see like this basically divide where CAAFAG don't really have access to this program. And if child protection actors don't do it, then they want access to economic recovery interventions. Then there is a lack of outcome measurement. This issue is directly linked to the duration of funding. So if you have short funding that are mainly under humanitarian funding mechanism, it's very difficult to include an outcome measurement component. The programs are not long enough, first of all, to measure outcomes improvement, and then it's rarely embedded into programs that are even a bit longer. So the result of that is that we basically implement a lot of programs on livelihood, but we rarely know if there was any positive outcomes for children in generating incomes, for example. The last point is around working in silos. As Davide mentioned it, we know this is one of the key challenges as well. I think this comes for various reasons. We all have a lot of work to do, but it's also because we have different approaches. So even when we try to say, hey, let's work together, we come from a different perspective. We have a different focus. We have a different framework of work. We look at vulnerability from a different angle. We also have different outcomes. So this makes it a bit more challenging to work together. So in this technical note, you will find a summary table that basically explains those differences and how to reconciliate them. So understanding the perspective of the other sector, hopefully will help you to speak, the language that is common, understand the perspective of the others and try to find common grounds to implement joint or integrated programming. So that's a quick summary of these key challenges, and then you will find a lot more information, obviously, in the technical note. In terms of good practices, lessons learned, I'd like to start with just a reminder for those who are not familiar with CAAFAG programming, how we usually program for CAAFAG. And so we usually talk about those 3 different components. We start with prevention. Prevention is mainly looking at the risk factors of recruitment. And then we know that poverty is one of the key risk factors that leads to recruitment. So having programs that address poverty that increase income generations for families and for children is a way to prevent recruitment. We also know that for the component of release, so like basically the exit of children from armed forces and armed groups, knowing for the children who have the possibility to leave, knowing that there will be programs that can support them with income generation can provide an alternative. So then they know that if they leave, there will be another solution to generate income. So that may also encourage children to leave armed groups and armed forces. And about reintegration, obviously, this intervention is very much a reintegration intervention. It's a key element of it. You have even organizations that for whom it's the main focus. Particularly for reintegration, we know that when we do this program, obviously for CAAFAG, but when we extend the scope to other children at risk, then this serves as both a prevention and a reintegration intervention. So livelihood is really present throughout all the components of CAAFAG programming. So one of the main recommendations from this technical note is adopting a phased approach, and we're looking at 3 different pathways. So the first pathway focuses on addressing basic needs and stabilizing income. So this is a short-term intervention that is usually about 1 year long, and it's typically cash for prevention, cash for work, cash and voucher assistance, food distribution. So this type of intervention is quite short, punctual, that will help children, as you can see, they're just right after their release. So it's an intervention that will help them stabilize their income, just stabilize the situation right after their release. This is to prevent re-recruitment. So when children just exit armed forces and armed groups, they need to have their basic needs met. Otherwise, there is a high risk of re-recruitment. So during that period of time, we just help the child to stabilize, maybe psychologically as well, without worrying about food, supporting parents before they can start the second pathway, which is a bit more intense in terms of presence. So the second pathway focuses more on economic recovery for reintegration. As you can see, the 2 pathway overlaps a little bit. And this is to basically provide support, like addressing basic needs of children while they are starting the economic recovery. So within the economic recovery, we include provision of skills and knowledge and resources to support the start of an income generating activity, or for employment. So when those 2 overlap, this means that basically children who are starting to learn those new skills don't need to worry about having food on the table, basically, while they're learning this new skills. And this can also lead for the startup of their activity. We know that they won't generate income on day 1. So having that flexibility and that overlap between the 2 pathways allow for that transition to be smooth, so that children, again, won't be tempted to go back to an armed group because they don't generate income. So this second pathway is more of a medium-term intervention, which is about 2 years long. 2 years is the minimum for a pathway 2, I would say, because if we go below, then we won't have time to go through the whole process. The third pathway is focusing on sustainable and decent work. This looks at system strengthening. So here we work with public and private actors of local and national economy. Basically, this intervention serves as prevention. So here we look more at primary prevention. We target all children, all youth from a particular area. And then it really goes for like also release and reintegration. So this one cuts across all 3 components of programming. And here the idea is to strengthen this local economy so that we can offer economic opportunities to youth, to heads of household. It will benefit the whole population. And for that way, we can prevent recruitment, also encourage release and promote reintegration. As you can see at the bottom of this diagram, we have a peace building process that is determinant for this. So obviously, the more advanced we are in this peace building process, the easier it will be to implement sustainable livelihood interventions. Just for, if you set up a small business in an area where there is lots of insecurity, where you don't know if you can go to work the next day, where it's difficult to have all your inputs to develop your business, all of that will seriously affect the sustainability of it. Again, this third pathway is also addressing both the needs of CAAFAG and of other children, both at risk as well as others in the community. In that case, you will need the input of child protection actors as well to support them, the implementation of this pathway. So now let's look at the theory of change. So this theory of change summarizes a bit the same idea of those three pathways. It's a little small, but don't worry, if you can't read it, you have it all in the technical note. So here, the idea is they have those three pathways. We saw that some of them overlap, but at the same time, we need to address additional needs of these children. So if you look at the blue boxes on the left side, then you will find as enabling conditions, which are mainly child protection and education outcomes. These enabling conditions are essential for the success of a livelihood program in Livelihood for CAAFAG. So if you implement your pathways and then you don't look at those specific enabling conditions, you may risk to not succeed basically in your programs for CAAFAG because they need those additional support. So we, for example, we need parents to be supportive of their children, of their business, but of their children in general. We've seen lots of examples where parents have jeopardized the business of their children because they were not engaged from the beginning, and they were trying basically to sabotage the business of their children. We also need children to be welcome in their communities, because if community members don't welcome them, this may also compromise their business. They might be a target of reprisals, of stigmatization. And children need also to have improved psychosocial well-being. Some of them may have experienced difficult or traumatic experiences while they were associated. So they also need that support to stabilize, regulate emotions, transition from that period of association to back into the community. So these are essential elements to be successful in their reintegration. They also need the life skills to transition from a military identity to a civilian identity. This is essential, and that takes time. And the last one, which is more of an education outcome, is looking at functional literacy and numeracy skills. So children who have been out of school for years may lack the functional literacy and numeracy skills that will be essential for the success of their business or to find employment. Right, so here we really look at how you have on one side those more like livelihood types of interventions. They're more, typically livelihood, but how it needs to be combined with the child protection outcomes to be successful for CAAFAG. And so we really need the two sectors to work hand in hand to be successful. The last part of the technical note focuses on how can we better foster that collaboration between the two sectors. So we've talked about the differences and how sectors are working in silos. And there you will find some examples, case studies, a bit of how to implement or strengthen that collaboration. So here we have 3 ways of working. The first one is mainstreaming, which is the one that most of you know. This is kind of the easiest one, quote unquote easiest, where here, like, each intervention is conducted by a specific sector. So here we have, for example, the livelihood sector that will build the capacities of a child protection actor to implement livelihood programs for CAAFAG. It can be also, as here you have the example, including CAAFAG as a vulnerability criterion for livelihood interventions. And that can be whether for direct support to children or to the heads of household. So these are like not so easy, I am aware of it, but these are things that are possible, that, you know, if we work together, we can mainstream in each other's sector these different outcomes, then to ultimately improve programming for CAAFAG. The second one is joint programming. So here we, in this case, we have each sector that will implement their program in the same location, for example, for the same beneficiaries, but then each sector will keep their own implementation and their own outcomes. So for example, you have a youth center that is managed by a child protection actor, and there you have a livelihood NGO who can come and provide vocational training, business skills for CAAFAG and other vulnerable children in that same space where child protection provides case management and life skills, for example. So they work in the same space, they collaborate, they do joint programming to target the same beneficiaries. And the last one is the integrated programming. So here we'll look at a holistic understanding of the child's well-being. We'll look at all of their needs, and then we together we work on addressing these needs. So here, for example, you would have caseworkers that will work closely with livelihood officers to identify and respond to the needs of CAAFAG and vulnerable children in a timely manner. Because when we work well together, then we can really respond more effectively to the needs of children. So you have examples, case studies in the technical note that can also give you some ideas on how this can be implemented maybe in your own organization. I'd like to end this with just some global recommendations. There are lots of recommendations in the technical notes, but I've just selected a few for you today. The first one is to prioritize the first pathway, so like the one on addressing basic needs, if you don't have enough time or enough funding. There is no need trying to squeeze a lot of vocational training and business skills training if you have a one-year-long funding. That's not going to work. It's better to take your time, you know, identify children, strengthen that relationship, develop trust, and then you can do good work within 1 year. The second point is that for children who have reached a legal working age in their country, they can be part of the livelihood program. And then so you will find some ILO definitions in a technical note that will basically tell you that these children can be part of a livelihood program. I know this is one of the issues where livelihood actors fear like promoting child labor or things like that. So they can be part of a livelihood program if they have reached that legal working age. They also, the third point is for child protection actors who do not have that expertise, we strongly encourage you to collaborate with the food security sector, whether to build your expertise or to refer children, you know, develop this, whether joint or integrated program to provide that service to children rather than trying to do something for which you don't have the expertise. And the last point is to really encourage both sectors to collaborate with the others. We cannot do it all. And, you know, working together will really improve the quality of a program and then the effectiveness of our interventions for CAAFAG. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Very informative and a lot covered in a very short time. Obviously, this is about toolkit and the technical note and how it's all put together. But I think now we can hear from a colleague who may describe in a bit more detail what this actually means on the ground and how this actually works in reality. So without further ado, let me hand you over to Augustine Thomas, Global Humanitarian Cash and Voucher Specialist at Save the Children, for his presentation. Augustine, over to you.
Thanks, Simon, and thanks, Sandra, for the presentations. So my name is Augustine Thomas. I work for Save the Children as a Global Humanitarian Specialist for CVA. I'm going to present you today a case study, pilots that we have undertaken in the DRC, in southern Kivu, not focusing so much on livelihoods, but more on CVA. But the point of this presentation is to show you how we try to have integrations between, on one hand, CVA experts and on the other hand, child protection experts. So I'm going to share the presentations. And that should be, can you see it? Can you see? Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. All right. So I'm going to talk about the project designs in a few minutes. So Save the Children is trying to build evidence on CVA for child protection outcomes and to what extent that leads to positive outcomes. And we noted over the past years that we missed evidence on CVA for CAAFAG. So we asked for a pilot study.
Augustine, yeah. Can I jump in? We've got a little message from the interpreter saying you're speaking a little quickly. If you could just slow down a little bit, I think it would help them.
All right. Sure, thank you. So we're doing this pilot project to assess the impact of CVA on child protection outcomes and ultimately to come up with evidence and some gaps about when CVA is working, when CVA is not working, when we try to tackle some of the issues related to CAAFAG. So it's a small project. We have targeted 150 vulnerable households in South Kivu with a 50-50 caseload, 50% being at risk of sending the children into armed groups and forces. So more looking at the prevention side, and the remaining 50% working with families who have children that were previously integrated into armed forces and or groups, but who have been reintegrated over the past 12 months. So as a standard at Save the Children, we made sure that we have a CVA preparedness measures in place. So we had undertaken some feasibility and risk assessments. We had signed framework agreements with the financial service provider, and we had internal SOPs and a RACI, which is, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's a matrix to basically divide roles and responsibilities within the organizations. So this was at the preparedness stage. Before the program started, we also undertook a cash risk assessment and a safeguarding assessment through focus group discussions and key informant interviews with local child protection actors. One of the main ideas was to understand if we provide cash, would there be more risks for the children that we are targeting? And if yes, are there any mitigation measures that we could put in place in order to reduce these risks to an acceptable level? So this was at the preliminary stage. Then we did the household selections. I will talk about it very quickly a bit later. And we've done, because it's a very operational research-focused project, we have strong middle component with a baseline, one post-distribution monitorings, one end lines a month after the last cash transfers, and an impact assessment 3 months after to measure the levels of sustainability of the outcomes. Basically, what's important to remember is that we are undertaking, it's currently being implemented. I just came back from the project site in the DRC. We have 3 multi-purpose cash transfer to complement case management being provided by our case workers, and the children receiving all the services also have access to mental health and psychosocial support, including through the child-friendly spaces. And still, as a complement, we have worked with national authorities for them to be able to deliver a certificate to certify that the child has been a CAAFAG, but now is reintegrated. And we are also providing basic budget management sessions by the caseworkers as part of case management. So that's the overall. When it's about the implementations. So there was a question I saw in the chat box, so I hope I will be able to answer some of these questions related to selections. So first of all, we started with the project presentations at committee levels, making sure that we limited some risks of stigmatizations. As I said before, 50% of the caseloads are ex-CAAFAG, but 50% are just families at risk. So that the ex-CAAFAGs, they basically fall within a broader caseloads. And we didn't communicate it clearly that we were specifically interested about the issues of CAAFAG. Then we presented the project to national authorities.
Augustine.
Yes, please go ahead.
Sorry. Would you mind if you can slow down a little bit more so
Still more,
that
yeah,
interpreters can catch up? Thank you.
Of course, thank you. Sorry, I speak a bit fast. And then we presented the project to national authorities responsible about the process for demobilizations and reintegrations, and with the Ministry of Social Affairs, the unit for caseworker. I emphasize about targeting and selections because in the context of the DRC, where there's been conflict for decades and humanitarian assistance for decades, there are some community tensions and some community questions when it comes to humanitarian delivery. And so it's very important. We saw that it was really important to be very clear about communication and sensitizations as a principles, but in this context, this was particularly true. So after the project presentations, we defined jointly the selection criteria. We've done so by conducting focus group discussions with local leaders and with leaders of opinions, such as teachers or people that have social influence in the community. Then the community leaders themselves did the pre-selections according to the jointly agreed selection criteria. Because we wanted to be 100% sure about the accuracy of the selection outcomes, we undertook then different verification surveys. One was done by a community-based verification committee. They went door to door asking households some questions from surveys that we had developed together that came from Save the Children, and that was adapted slightly. Then the national authority in charge of DDR programming undertook the verifications to make sure that the ex-CAAFAG that were initially selected were actual ex-CAAFAG. And if that was the case, then they were receiving a certificate. Last but not least, Save the Children itself, with his mail team, undertook a final verifications with, which is a household economic survey, and we developed a scorecard attributing a score to each household, and any household going over the eligibility thresholds was then considered as selected. So very thorough verification process with the 3 steps verifications. And after all that, we communicated back the selection outcomes to the communities. So we had meeting with UNPDTL, the national authority, and to the community-based verification committee and the community leaders. And then we had communications one-on-ones to those households who were selected. We talk a lot about how we try to speak the same language between Livelihood, CVA, market-based programming experts, and on the other side, child protection experts. This is something that we are trying to do at Save the Children. And in this specific project, first, we ensured about the targeting, that we had clear communications between the CVA and the CP team. So any children receiving CVAs are receiving case management. Secondly, about the timeframes. We have different awards with different donors, with different requirements. That being said, we made sure that those timeframes were aligning so that CVA would start only when case management and MHPSS through case management counselings or the child-friendly spaces was being delivered. This was for us a very important point. Secondly, about building internal capacities. That's a point that Sandra highlighted as a key recommendations. And indeed, so before program implementations, we work with the CVA teams and the child protection teams on what's the differences between economic and social risk factors, and what are the mitigation measures that both teams could be thinking together in order then to make some program adaptations. And then specifically for the child protection team, we have developed at global levels a toolkit that we call at Save the Children's Money Matters. It's a simple basic toolkit that you can find on the CAALP and other global resources. It's a free tools toolkit to equip caseworkers about leading budget management sessions as part of regular case management. The idea is that it's not so much looking at how to spend the CVA, but how to approach the idea, the issue of budget management from the entire household perspective and looking at the different sources of incomes. So going beyond CVA. And then another point, which for us we consider extremely important, is to make sure there is regular and timely information flows between caseworkers and CVA experts. So you can see on the presentations, the case management cycle. It's a 6-step cycle that many of you are probably familiar with. The idea is that identifying at key steps of the case management cycles where information should come from child protection teams and where feedbacks and other kind of information should come from the CVA team for the CV teams. So for example, looking at the steps of identifying, screenings, and registering case management beneficiaries. And then when the caseworkers assess the needs specific to the child, and based on this, develop the case plan. These informations are very valuable for CVA experts. They can inform us about the vulnerabilities in a general manner in the context. Are there specific child protection risks? Are they CAAFAG, for example? And what are the specific needs? This information for us, for CVA experts, are very important. They can help us refine the selection criteria. They can help us calculate the transfer values and determine the frequency and the durations of the assistance, and discuss together if some conditions or restrictions should be put in place. We always start from the neutral perspective that we provide multi-purpose cash assistance, but if conditions and restrictions are to be imposed, they need to be well justified. And then, on the other hand, the caseworkers, they supported the household registrations for CVA. Because they knew the households, they were in a privileged place to, for example, facilitate to get, for example, the residency permits from the local authorities. This was very valuable for the CVA team. And still at this stage, the CVA experts are able to feedback to the caseworkers about the CVA programs. And in turn, the caseworkers are able to inform beneficiaries about details about the CVA programs as part of case management. Why have they been selected? What is the transfer values? How long is it going to be for? What is the frequency? Where to get the cash? What is the delivery mechanism, etc. These are informations that the caseworkers are delivering up as part of case management. And then when the case plan is being implemented and being followed and reviewed, this can also help the CVA teams. So because they have this ongoing relationship with the households, they build this trust, they know them very well. And during the CVA operations, in that case, we are doing direct cash in hands, which was the preference of the community. They facilitate the flow of beneficiaries, the physical flow of the peoples, and they also help to reply to questions, manage the complaints and the feedbacks. And then, of course, as mentioned, during class managements, during implementations, they're able to do these basic budget management sessions. So helping the children and the households to make the best use of the CVA, but going beyond that, looking at the overall household source of incomes. So this could come from livelihoods. And what we do as well is risk monitoring. So we have currently implemented, the product is not finished. So we are trying to make sure that caseworkers are able to monitor the risk and feedback to the CVA team so that then we can engage in some discussions and see if some tweaking, some adaptations should be made.
Thank you, Thomas. Augustine, sorry. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. We still need to get to Q&A. Apologies if we stop the presentation there, and then I can open up to questions on the floor. Hopefully some of the questions will allow you to bring out the final elements you're going to present on as well. Yeah, thank you so much so far, and apologies again. As I say, we really are looking for questions from the floor on this, and we already have a couple in. Please feel free to use the Q&A function. First up, we have a question from Yang Fu, talking about increased collaboration between child protection and food security actors and the issue and problem of children within livelihood programs, and the fact that many livelihood programs have a blanket ban on those under 18, and what are some of the considerations or capacities that could be put in place to sort of address this, as Sandra mentioned earlier. So Sandra, as you did mention this a bit earlier, if you could possibly go in a little more detail, that would be great.
Yeah, it's not an easy one. And yeah, so I would say, yes, there is advocacy that needs to be done, but it needs to be done at different levels. So it's not, I think, in the field that we can convince, program officers, program managers to change their own organization's strategy. So I think that advocacy needs to be at the higher level, at the level probably of the heads of organizations or the department leads, for example, livelihood department leads versus child protection, and see how can we advocate at that level. I think there is also a responsibility of the cluster leads to promote that collaboration, to be kind of role models, like say, yes, we can collaborate. Yes, these are the things we need to pay attention to, but there are ways to do it safely and without doing harm for children. I think what I've heard, at least, and I'm sure Yang has a lot of experience in this, but I hear people saying, oh, but we don't want to do child labor. We don't want to promote child labor and then get children out of school. And I think this is the biggest fear, and which is good. I think this is safe in a way that they have that concern. But basically they go almost to another extreme and saying, yeah, we don't do anything with children. We don't want to be accused of anything. So we just do it the simple way. So there are ways to do it in a safe way. The first thing is to do risk assessment together with child protection actors and livelihood actors together. And then there we can identify the risk and see how do we address them together. There is no point of designing a program on one side and then calling another sector and say, hey, do you want to join us to implement this? This is not the way, right? You need to do it jointly from the very beginning, and from the assessment, I think is the best approach from my perspective, at least, but obviously this is a process.
Thanks, Sandra. And there's also obviously vocational training and informal apprenticeships in areas on skills training, which sort of bridge the area of education and the world of work as well, which is another sort of entry point which could be used. I see we have a number of questions about trainings, a number of people also asking for the presentation to be made available. Again, I would direct all of you to the community of practice, because much of this will be shared there, has already been shared there. And the more interactions that are available there, the more cross-pollination of information and ideas will happen. So please check out the community of practice once this session finishes, and I'm sure much of that information will be available. We have another question from Kennedy on how to ensure do no harm and safety if we go house to house for verification. I'm not sure which one of you two would like to take that question.
I think this is for Augustine, this one.
Yeah, I thought so too. Augustine?
Thanks, Kennedy, for the questions. And that's that's a very good point. So what do we try in our levels is, well, first make sure that our teams are trained on child safeguarding and do no harm approach. And then we make sure that there's not one person going alone doing the home visits, especially if it's, for example, a woman-headed household with small children. We'll make sure that there is a gender balanced team. And then there is, of course, available complaints and feedback mechanisms. So the points I would say is that make sure the teams are trained, make sure they know what the principles, and then to have a balanced team so that there's not one person going alone. And if Sandra, you want to add, yeah, of course.
Yeah, no, I think that's it's all good.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you very much. We seem to have a number of different questions coming in. I think we'll start with this one from Marcello. How can the toolkit help the advocacy with donors to secure funding for the integrated approach for CAAFAG, rather than trying to align different grants to different timelines? Is there a perceived opening for multi-year integrated funding based on current evidence, or is more work necessary? Sandra, I know you were thinking about the donors as well before this chat, so I think this can go straight to you.
Yeah, so in the guidance note, you have a series of recommendations specifically for donors. And so there, yes, I think you can use the toolkit to go to them and say, we need this particular length of funding, and then you will find that in the technical notes. So if you want to do pathway 2, you need 2 years longer funding. Otherwise, there's no point starting, really. Same for pathway 3, it's a minimum of 3 years if you want to do effective work. So use the technical note to advocate to donors. And I think, yeah, there's still a need for longer term funding. I think it comes also to this issue of nexus, right? So if you are in this humanitarian funding mechanism, it's often very short. There is a bit of education that needs to be done for donors, but I think here the idea is finding those funding mechanism that looks at nexus. So like, you know, this transition from development, from humanitarian to development. And yeah, I think there is still advocacy needed on this, unfortunately.
Yeah, thanks, Sandra, for that. I'm very aware of time. We have 1 minute till 4 o'clock and we were going to close, but I think we can take one more question and then I will try and wrap up very quickly. I see Abdikadir Mohammed has posted about families affected by armed conflict whose children are part of these armed groups need to be included as a vulnerable group within cash and voucher assistance. And then saying about WFP and other livelihood partners need to consider children, especially CAAFAG, when selecting beneficiaries. Augustine, maybe you could add a couple of little points or agreements on this, or some of the challenges of this quickly to answer that question.
Yes, that sounds more like a good statements than questions, actually. Absolutely, we want to not just focus on CAAFAG, but we want to broaden the scopes of the selection so that we reduce the risk of stigmatizations. I think that's the main points to reply in a clear way. And then if WFP is eager, is willing to include CAAFAGs, then I think we can all be happy in this table.
Excellent. I'm sure Save the Children are already doing this in much of your programs, aren't you?
Actually, not so much. We're really trying to expand and see to what extent it's working and to what extent we're able. So, you know, everyone is still in the learning and figuring out what's the evidence and the good practices. So these guidelines come at the perfect timing, actually.
No, definitely. No, thank you. And as I say, we have the we now have the technical note as the CAAFAG tool, so please do check out not only the community of practice, but also the other tools available through the Alliance for Child Protection and Humanitarian Action, both on livelihoods and child labour in humanitarian action, as well as on CAAFAG, because again, this is another area I think which overlaps and adds value to developing livelihood interventions. And also gets to the question earlier about how to include those of age under 18 safely. Final points for all of you who have joined, and many thanks for all of you who have joined from the beginning and are still here. We have a quick Zoom poll on satisfaction levels of those of you who are here. So did you learn anything that is useful for you? Please do answer. And then also, please rate your satisfaction about the session. Again, please only choose one. And we will try and get the results very, very quickly. And then I will share these. And then, yeah. As I say, hopefully some of these conversations will continue on the community of practice. I also recommend those of you who are interested in this topic and looking to work on this area and have not yet registered either with the Alliance for Child Protection and Humanitarian Action or the CAAFAG Task Force, please do look at joining both of these groups for extra support. And as I said, the community of practice is also the place to post and discuss such actions. I'm not sure if we have the results in yet. So we have 100% of people feel they have learned something useful from this session, which is very, very good to hear. And over 90% of you are either very satisfied or somewhat satisfied, with almost 2/3 of you very satisfied with this session, which I'm very happy to hear about. And I'm sure Sandra is also very happy to hear about. With that, given what the time is, I think we should look to close the session. Many thanks for all of you for joining, participating, asking your questions throughout, and many thanks to all of our participants, all our panelists and presenters as part of this. Augustine, thank you very much. Sandra, thank you very much. Davide as well, and thank you to Camilla for the video as well. I wish you all a pleasant week ahead, and thank you very much, everyone. Have a good day.